You read the title and saw the thumbnail. That's right. Today we find out, is it possible to beat Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity without moving? Before we start the challenge today, we of course need to determine the scope and rules of it. Our rules are actually pretty simple. We cannot move the left analog stick, which is what you use to move around during gameplay, during any of the standard boots on the ground gameplay sections. That, however, does not include the Divine Beast sections, because let's be honest, that's more so like piloting or driving than standard moving anyway. So, if we can avoid moving the left analog stick during the normal gameplay sections, and beat Calamity Ganon and the game as a whole, while keeping to that rule, it'll be a successful challenge in my book. Oh, and one last thing to consider. Something we don't have any say in for this challenge is the fact that we'll be accompanied by AI captains for basically all of the levels in the game. They obviously care not for our challenge and will walk around regardless. For our challenge's purposes today, we do not care about what the AI does. In fact, I'm even cool with giving them orders. As long as whomever we happen to be controlling at any given time doesn't move, we're good. Alright, now let's get into it. Okay, so here we are, thrust into a battle in the shoes of Link. Now for the million-dollar question. If we can't move in the traditional sense, how are we going to get around the battlefield? Well, lucky for us, Link's attacks do offer us a means by which to replace traditional movement, since Link moves forward a bit with each swing of his sword. And even better, if you do 2 light attacks and then a heavy attack, Link will actually start shield surfing, which moves him forward even faster than sword swings. Now that's all well and good for moving forward. However, that's all it achieves for us. This method of traversal does not give us a way to turn, which is kind of an important thing to be able to do if you're going to navigate around a battlefield even close to competently. This is where Link's unique action comes in. If you press the right trigger, then Link will pull out his bow, which you can aim with either motion controls or the right analog stick. After firing the bow, Link faces in the same direction he just fired it. That means we can use the bow to turn. So great, with our locomotion figured out, we can mop up these bokoblins standing around Hyrule Field until we eventually face a moblin. Now this moblin is the first strong enemy we've faced, and actually one of the nice things about strong enemies is that we can lock onto them by pressing down on the right analog stick. That makes it so we are always facing towards the enemy in question, which means our attacks will always be going towards an enemy we have locked onto. This particular moblin though, we just kind of obliterate with a special attack, so that's nice. Our next objective is to capture some outposts, which brings us to blows against some more strong enemies. This time, large bokoblins. And coming against them without a special attack all charged and ready to go, forces us to think about how we are going to go about our defense. Luckily for us, this game has an amazing guard mechanic, where if you just hold down the left trigger, you are immune from what, at least right now, seems like basically all head-on attacks. So we've got a pretty healthy, strong enemy combat playbook established now. Lock on, maintain a guard whenever they attack us, use runes when appropriate, and strike back when an opening presents itself. Which does pretty well for us, at least for these large bokoblins. Anyway, as I was going from outpost to outpost at a pace that was definitely annoyingly slower than what the designers had intended, I came across the discovery that Link here can do backflips by pressing the dodge button, which we could theoretically try to use in combat to try and get some flurry rushes in, as well as use out of combat as a faster movement option, especially decent for traversing areas without many enemies in them. Oh, by the way, we also have unlocked Impa as a playable character, who unfortunately does not have a bow to use for turning. What she does have is the ability to mark enemies with symbols, which unfortunately doesn't help us get her to turn. Unless she's airborne when she uses that ability. In that case, we can aim with motion controls on the right stick just like with Link's bow, and just like with Link's bow, whatever direction we aim the symbol shuriken in will be the direction Impa faces after the move is over. Now of course this move requires Impa to be airborne to use, so that begs the question, does Impa have a reliable way to get airborne? The answer, luckily, is yes. If Impa uses a single light attack followed by a heavy attack, she starts gliding on her paraglider thing, which we can activate the symbol shuriken from. And actually, I found that move is also Impa's best means of forward movement. It's no shield surf, but it'll do. Well, actually, there's also her Cryonis rune, which is much faster, but it is a bit finicky. They're both viable options at this point, though. Anyway, after finally meandering around with Impa until reaching and capturing the last outpost, all that remains for this mission is having Link take down a trio of moblins, which, following our previously established tactics we use against strong monsters, goes quite smoothly. On to the next mission. On the road to the ancient tech lab, our party is attacked by a suddenly hostile guardian. Typically, you would want to activate some unearthed guardians to soften your foe up and beat the mission that way, but honestly that seems like a bit of a hassle to me. What we opt to do instead is use a lot of guards, parries, and dodges to take out the guardian the old-fashioned way. Yes, that is something that you can do. On to the next mission. Alright, now to gather the rest of the champions, starting with Daruk. Unfortunately, the first thing we find on this mission is that both Daruk and Princess Zelda are unable to turn at all without using the left stick. As such, we'll be sticking with Link and Impa primarily for this mission. Most of the first part of the mission goes slow but steadily. Telling Impa to stay behind and guard the outpost proved to be a great decision when moblins came by and attacked them. This pair of fire moblins towards the end is really annoying since it's tough to block two attackers at once. We do make it through though and finish off those Igneotalises. After that is a Varudania section, which, as we've already gone over, we are ignoring for the purposes of this challenge. Next up is Urbosa, the Gerudo Chief. Here we get a chance to play as Urbosa, who, again, unfortunately does not have any way to turn, and therefore isn't of much use to us. The mission itself is pretty standard fare, though. Mipha, the Zora Princess, is up next. Here we, of course, meet Mipha, but again, unfortunately, just like the other champions thus far, she does not have any way to turn either. I guess Link and Impa really are some rare catches. Again, we find that paired up strong enemies prove to be some of the greatest causes for hardship we endure in this mission. Special attacks help with that pretty well, though. Then, it's all capped off with a Lionel fight. And I will say, fighting this guy is at least a bit annoying, since so many of his attacks that leave him vulnerable for a counterattack also happen to leave us pretty far away from him with how we're defending against him, and therefore less readily able to counterattack super effectively. This is where Link's bow and the stasis rune really come in handy, but you do need to be careful with the stasis, because quite often you can overdo it, leaving yourself vulnerable for one of his upcoming attacks, because your rune wasn't properly recharged. Little by little we chip away at his health though, and ultimately we come out victorious. Then there's a Varuta section, which again, we don't care about. Next up we take on the Rito, which is so annoying. This is due in large part to the density of archers in their forces. They obviously keep their distance so they don't just walk into our attacks the same way melee soldiers do. Additionally, their archery interrupts our attacks, which makes it really difficult for us to move anywhere. Often you end up just kind of getting stun-locked by them. At the very least, Link does have his bow, which he can use to deal with them from a distance. But you almost need to eliminate all of their archers from an area that way before you can make any meaningful progress. Now when it's the captains that have bows, and you're fighting two at once, and you're Impa, let me just tell you, that is mighty annoying. Luckily, just like in previous circumstances, a special attack helps significantly. Finally, we get our chance to face Revali, which is a fight about as annoying as the Lionel fight from the last mission, for very similar reasons. Since so many of his attacks occur from a distance, counterattacking effectively can be quite difficult. Oftentimes I ended up counterattacking with little more than just a single volley of arrows. Bit by bit, though, we do eventually prevail. Throughout most of the Yiga clan attacks, we don't have access to Link, and instead must make do with Impa and Revali, the latter of which, as it turns out, doesn't have any reliable way to turn. But while Impa certainly does, at the very least, have decent enough movement capabilities, I certainly much prefer Link's movement abilities, and as such, having to make do with a less than ideal tool, getting through this mission proves to be a bit sluggish. Finally, we get to play as Link at the end to fight Suga. This proves to be one of the tougher duels we've encountered, because more so than perhaps with any other solo enemy we've faced thus far, blocking against Suga is not a guarantee that you won't take damage. With more active defense like actual dodging, though, we do manage to get by. With that done, next up is the freeing of Korok Forest, which starts off with a Vomito section, which, as per usual, we don't particularly care for. Though I will note that due to the way Vomito's controls work, this Divine Beast section at the very least is actually possible to beat without moving the left analog stick at all. The on-the-ground section is, for the most part, pretty simple. The Stalnox is laughably easy, and most of the Hollow champions aren't too bad either. Though I will say, fighting Hollow Rivali as Zelda was actually quite difficult. Mostly due to the fact that Zelda, without having had her moves upgraded at all, because why would I? She can't really move around effectively, so why would I upgrade her? Anyways, without those upgrades, she possesses truly terrible forward movement capabilities. Not impossible, mind you, just mighty annoying. Then finally, the mission's conclusion with Astor is actually pretty easy on account of it intentionally being primarily a power chip with the newly acquired Master Sword, even in spite of the large number of opponents you face at once. Our greatest concern during the next mission, the Road Home Besieged, is the time limit. Shield surfing is not bad, but it's certainly not quite as quick as running. That being said, especially by taking advantage of our new full health projectile attacks, we can make the time we need. And then there's a conclusion with 2 stone taluses, which is just mean, in my opinion. What I found was the way to go on this was focusing on one early on, hopefully taking it down early, thus freeing you up to more easily take down the remaining one within the time limit, which does work pretty well if I do say so myself. Akala Tower is our next mission, and it goes by pretty easily. The layout in Destroy the Yiga clan I find to be kind of annoying to navigate around. The standard enemies around the area aren't too much to write home about, but fighting Suga is a worthy duel as always. And fighting Suga and Master Koga at the same time is quite the chaotic experience, to say the least. One of the major issues is that your 2 foes' vulnerabilities often don't line up with each other. It's just important that you capitalize on joint opportunities whenever they arrive. Oh, and shooting people in the head with volleys of arrows. That's also pretty useful. Honestly, the toughest part about when courage fails is just being thorough enough with clearing the enemies for Zelda to feel safe advancing. A bit more time consuming, but certainly still very doable, even without standard movement controls at our disposal. Calamity Strikes incorporates a decent bit of fighting Guardians. You certainly don't want to mess up your timing when fighting these guys, and yes, 2 at once can certainly be troublesome, but not so much when you've got a special attack corked up and ready to go. The toughest part about the next couple of missions were the time limits. And yes, we did come very close as we shield surfed and fought our way to the imperiled champions. But even if it was only barely, each and every time, we do make it on time. Then it's back to Akala Citadel, where we finally discover a 3rd player character capable of actually turning in the heat of battle. Teba can use the right stick to aim his runes. After he uses a rune, he faces in the direction in which it was used. I'd still give Link and Impa the edge in terms of mobility, if only because their turning ability isn't linked to a cooldown. But I am certainly happy to have Teba with us now. As for the mission itself, it's a lot of Guardians, which, funny story, back when I first got and played through Age of Calamity, I was hopeless when it came to fighting Guardians, because I didn't realize that guarding was a mechanic in the game until literally the final boss fight. Under those circumstances, Guardians are terrible automatons of death. But even without moving, if you know how to guard, which, luckily, present me does know how to do, they're actually pretty simple to fight. Oh, one thing about the level, though, that I will note is that getting the button prompt to work for jumping off this cliff did take a bit of doing. Eventually got it, though. In each step like Thunder, Zelda unlocks her true power, which offers us a whole new moveset for her, which still doesn't include turning. Oh well. Guess we'll stick with the good old trio. Now, not to sell this mission short, it is full of powerful enemies, but ultimately, we've faced all of these guys before, so it really isn't that much trouble to just fight them all again. Unless we get through this mission pretty easily. The Great Plateau finally discovered how to make High Noxes at least somewhat intimidating, which is apparently to force you to fight 2 at once. It's not that bad, though. What's more annoying is just the way the level is divided. Not difficult, mind you, just mildly annoying to slog to and from the teleporter. The penultimate mission has lots of Guardians and a bit of a timed mechanic with the Blood Moon, which I honestly thought would be considerably more troublesome than it actually was. Ultimately, I only ended up needing to kill the final enemies twice to make their deaths stick. And now it's time. Time to enter Hyrule Castle proper, and show just how far we can get in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity without moving. The mission opens with a bit of a greatest hits of fighting the Blight Ganons. Thunderblight is of course on brand as being quite difficult and annoying, especially after it divides itself into 3 entities. Although I will say, Water Blight's Ganon really gave Thunder a run for its money here. I'm not sure if it's because of the awful terrain it caught me on, being on a staircase, but it did a spectacular job at keeping favorable spacing for it during the fight. I actually had to temporarily switch to Zelda to avoid dying, but ultimately we do prevail here. But speaking of dying, I did actually end up dying to the Harbinger and Terrico boss fights. Mostly due to running out of resources, and failing to block attacks, obviously. I guess it's not too bad for these to be the first deaths of the challenge. Aster's fight ended up being a delicate dance wherein it was so annoying to chase him down whenever his numerous instances of teleporting occurred, but after a team effort he was brought down without a death. That just leaves Calamity Ganon himself, which is actually, in my opinion, a pretty easy boss fight. And with that, we have beaten Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, all without moving even once. Oh, and I guess also, bonus challenge achieved? Since our XP ended up being so focused on Link, and since I didn't mind entering missions a bit underleveled, this also ended up inadvertently becoming a playthrough where we only played the main story missions. So, yeah, that's interesting too. But anyways, guys, thank you for your patience in waiting for this video. I hope it was worth the wait. I would have gotten it out a bit sooner, but I ended up catching coronavirus right when I was planning on recording the narration. But it's here now, and I'm basically better, so the schedule should hopefully get back to normal from here on out. If you did enjoy this video, please like, comment, subscribe, etc. And if you want to see more Zelda content I've made, I have 2 recommendations for you today. First is the video that I currently more or less consider to be my magnum opus, which is a no jumping or gliding challenge for Breath of the Wild. Or if you want something a bit different, you may want to take a gander at my Let's Play of Link's Awakening over on my Let's Play channel. So until next time, guys, I've been CMeeCraft, and I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.